Okay. About 6 months ago in work, I was asked to give a talk to all my colleagues in work. I work for a Dutch company here in Amsterdam of about 150 people, 150 engineers, should I say. It's a larger company than that. But the talk title they gave me was How to Be a PHP Guru. And to be honest, I was not qualified. I have no idea what a PHP guru is, let alone how to be one. But I did say I would give them a talk. I'd give them a talk about some of the work that I've done and some of the lessons I've learned along the way. So I retitled the talk, An Elderly Software Developer's Long Journey Through Technology. And thinking that was a bit long, I came up with a slightly more pithy, slide share is not working the way it should, a life of lessons in 30 minutes, which seems a rather shorter, more meaningful title in a lot of ways. And let's just check. Okay. So, a life in 30 minutes. Well, the first question, who am I? A lot of you may not know me, may not know my name. So what qualifies me, besides having a grey beard, to talk about a life in software development and lessons I've learned? Well, Mark Baker, I'm an English immigrant in the Netherlands. I'm a Brexit escapee here. I'm a senior software engineer at a company called Recharge.com in Amsterdam. I do a fair bit of open source work. Some of you might recognize projects there that I've been involved in. I'm an elephant collector. Okay, a little bit more detail about that. My background in software. Well, as I say, I'm an old geezer, an old developer, and a Brexit escapee. And 4 years ago, I actually swapped the rolling hills of Lancashire for the canals of Amsterdam. So I've been in software for at least 4 years. It is a little bit longer than that, though. You see, when I was born, most houses didn't even have one of those things. Most houses didn't have one of those things. For those of you that don't recognize them, that's a telephone and a television set. They have been pretty much replaced these days by what you see there, little mobile and your Netflix subscription. But yes, I was born over 60 years ago, at a time when technology was just beginning to appear in people's homes. In many cases, the technologies we take for granted today existed, but they weren't mainstream at all. The first computer game that I ever had was this one, a game called Pong. And it was a console game in its own way, but the console looked a little bit like that if I'd made it neatly. In my case, I didn't have the fancy plastic box around it, and the control potentiometers were just hanging loose at the end of 2 wires. And my mother would have killed me if she'd ever known I played it, because she forbade me from plugging it into the television set that we had by then. That was sometime around 1970, maybe 71 when I built that. First computer I ever programmed for was one of these things, an Apple IIe. The reason for learning how to program on it? It had an implementation of Space Invaders on. And I got kind of frustrated. I was working at Reading University just as a cleric at the time, in one of the departments there. and they had a couple of these machines around the laboratories. And I used to go in at lunchtime on my lunch break, play Space Invaders. And then when I finished my lunch break, I'd turn it off and I'd come back the following day and the score would have reset. So the first programming that I ever did was to ensure that it could write my high score to disk so that when I came in the following day, I'd still have my high score there and could try and beat myself rather than just beating the computer every time. I'm sure some of you have similar stories of how you got into programming, although maybe not quite as much written in Apple Basic. First computer I ever owned was one of those, bought as a kit. Had to build it myself from the various parts that came through the post. Anyone from America listening, that was branded as a Timex ZX80. Those of you from Cambridge, well, Clive Sinclair should be well known to any of you in Cambridge. So I ended up going to university. I had no idea what to do with myself at that time in my life, so I studied theology, philosophy, and Indian religion. So I guess it was kind of natural that I'd end up in computer programming. I went to Durham University, and one thing they did have was a computer science department. And I used to go there in the evenings to play around on the computers that they had there. They didn't have any sort of individual computers. They had one of these. Don't know if anyone recognizes that one. It's a PDP-7. I can't remember which particular model. That was your input-output device. That was your keyboard and printer. And if you needed to save anything or load anything, you had paper tape for it. And I actually wrote an implementation of Colossal Cave on that. But the most interesting thing about the university computer, it had an internet connection. And if I went along at close to midnight, I could get to speak with the students that were just finishing their work days over in the United States. And that was really a great way to communicate with computer science students in other countries. Not that there were many other countries connected up in that day and age. No idea how many internet connected universities there were. I think there were 2 in the UK at the time, but I was lucky I was at one of them. And I will confess I nearly failed my degree because I spent so much of my night times in the computer science department and slept a lot during the day when I should have been attending lectures. But I did graduate and I got a job working in computers. It took me a while. Most people expected you to have a computer science degree if you were going to work in computers. But I got a job where I was writing code in embedded C to do fast Fourier transforms, a nice little bit of mathematics, which was certainly challenging. This was to filter out background noise from sonar signals. And I would like to say it was perhaps something like tracking whales or something interesting like that. But to be honest, there weren't that many companies employing computer people back in those days. And by far the biggest industry employing computer people was the defense industry. I was writing the guidance systems for torpedoes, or a small part of it, which is not necessarily the nicest of work when you do hold that human life matters. But at the time, I wasn't in a position to complain too much because I had a wife and I had a baby daughter to support. And it was an income at a time when an income wasn't so easy to get working with computers. But I did leave that company relatively quickly and moved on to work in something rather more interesting, which was shop floor robotics, programming the computers that did shop floor work. And there's lots of lovely pictures, film footage that you can find of these things online. Most of the time, they'll look a lot more boring than that, but programming them is a lot of fun. Then IBM invented this creature, the IBM PC, and effectively open sourced the specification for it so that anybody could build a computer that would be compatible with it, and a lot of companies did. And all of a sudden, they started appearing in offices, so there was suddenly a lot more opportunity for a computer programmer and developer like myself to actually find work. And I did find work. I found work various places. I worked on shoe manufacturing, keeping track of orders, inventory on the shop floor, what's being made, what's being fulfilled, basically order management systems, stock control systems. I've worked in a bottle plant where they actually took in your empty bottles, the glass bottles, melted down the glass and recycled it to make new bottles. Again, shop floor work, robotics, and some fun programming. And something we have lots of here in the Netherlands, windmills. I worked in a computer plant where it was actually keeping track of treatments applied to wheat ground in the mills. And the average lifetime of a computer in the environment of dust in those windmills was about 6 months. And then they all had to be replaced. And I spent about 10 years working in the semiconductor design industry and doing a lot of work in communications. And then some guy called Tim Berners-Lee in Switzerland invented this WorldWideWeb thing. And I started getting very involved in that. Classroom management systems, online learning systems, and of course, online shopping carts and online shops. I've done all that type of work in my career. This is the website that I think is my greatest achievement. I was responsible for the CBeebies website at the BBC, actually working out at the old BBC TV centre at Shepherd's Bush, or near Shepherd's Bush down in London, for 6 months building that. It's very much a CMS system. They fill in the details of all the programs and everything like that into a front end, and my code transforms it into the web page that you see. And as far as I'm aware, it's still about 80% of my code that's running, because every so often, for some reason, I had to give my own email address when I actually set up the system. I still get LinkedIn Jira tickets. So I get notifications that bugs I reported are still in the system, have now been fixed. And given that that was 15 odd years ago, I'm quite pleased that it's still running. So throughout that time, I've programmed in, well, certainly all those languages as a professional, and a few more besides. So I guess that establishes my credentials as an old computer developer. But I'm also very involved in what these days is called open source. When I started, it wasn't open source, it was free software. You did still provide the source code normally. And probably the first thing I wrote was a computer game, a text adventure game called Shades of Grey. It's not particularly exciting seeing a text adventure game, but a group of us joined together and wrote that, and it actually won an award back in 1991, 92. I think it was 91, Text Adventure of the Year award from the AGT Softworks. So I'm kind of proud of that, especially as it was used as a yardstick for some years afterwards for all text adventure games that were being written at the time. That was written on one of those things, an Amstrad PPC 640. Useful for a number of things. It was a dual floppy drive, no hard disk. It was 640K of memory. And I was able to write that text adventure game on it, even though it was a basic VGA screen, not particularly good for any graphics, but it had a built-in modem, 1275, so I was able to internet connect on it as well. Some of you may have actually used software that I've written or part written at one time or another. One of my other applications, I only wrote a small set of subroutines for it, was a program called WinVN. It was a reader for Usenet News, and I wrote some routines for actually providing a threaded display of newsgroup postings. But the code for that was taken by a certain company and used in one of their products. So anyone that's ever used Microsoft Outlook for looking at Usenet newsgroups may well have been running my code if they were viewing things in threaded mode. Other Microsoft products, I wrote some of the lighting effects for a particular screensaver, which was released as part of Windows 95 and then re-released 20 years later in 2005 as an anniversary edition screensaver, the Underground Dungeon Complex or Castle, whatever it was supposed to be. I wrote some of the lighting effects for that. And again, adopted by Microsoft because they're open source code. And then the World Wide Web came along, and open source software became open source software as opposed to freeware. When the World Wide Web was invented, I had one of the first 1,000 websites out there. It doesn't still exist, so I had to go back on Wayback Machine to find even the front page of it. And that actually dates from 95. That particular image was all I could find on Wayback Machine, but I posted that website in 93, which is before some of you, I'm sure, were even born. Then I discovered this, a programming language called PHP. I was writing most of my code in Perl at the time, although my original website had been written in Turbo Pascal, believe it or not. I say it was dynamic. It used a series of CSV files containing data, a series of Turbo Pascal scripts that generated raw HTML files, which were pushed up every night to the website. That was as close as dynamic as I could originally get, but Perl was a useful language because it hooked into Apache, mod Perl, and allowed me to write truly dynamic websites or truly dynamic code for websites. And I was writing a newsletter script. Someone asked me if I could port it to a language called PHP. I'd never come across PHP. I took a look at it. I said, why not? Did so and decided this PHP code is actually readable. If anyone's ever looked at the Perl code, you had to be something of an expert in abstruse languages to read Perl code, but PHP code was beautifully readable. And for open source, that was excellent because I didn't have to maintain it in the same way myself. It was code that was easy enough for anyone to understand. So I could provide the basic code and they could understand it well enough to modify it. This PHP 4 was just being phased out in favor of PHP 5 at the time. So probably technically I started with PHP 5, although that newsletter script was PHP 4. What else do I do open source related? I blog about things that I do, particularly about language and code related things. I have a blog page with, most recently, a number of proposed changes to the list structure in PHP, one of which is currently being discussed as an RFC, although it's not my implementation of it. And that's providing default values for values that aren't there in the original array that you list. I talk at user groups and conferences on a whole range of code-related subjects, including, but not limited to, those that you can see on screen there. And I write open source libraries. A lot of people think that open source projects are managed as shown in that picture. It's not true. They're much more typically managed by a single person working in their own time, often in the ridiculous hours of the morning. Apart from the Jurassic Park poster, and that's been me on many occasions. So the open source work that I've been involved in that you might have come across, well, I've contributed to the PHP core code. If anyone has ever used SPL's data structures, I was one of the people involved in developing doubly linked lists, which I use for things like stacks and queues. Also contributed and had rejected other changes. I thought it was a very nice, sweet, optional precision argument that I was passing into ceiling and floor functions that would allow you to floor something to 2 decimal places or to 3 decimal places. Sadly, that was rejected because it fell apart with certain values. And I never found a solution for that. Although from the values in question, it was easy to work out what the problem was. Floating point overflow is a terrible thing. I've also written some of the unit tests for PHP core itself, done some work on the documentation, and periodically get involved in internals discussions. And excuse my coughing. One of my biggest projects in the early days of PHP was a content management system called Easy Contents. I eventually grew bored with that, and it was taken over by the Drupal community. I'm not sure if it's still existent or if it's dead. As far as I'm aware, it is still available. But I can't imagine that there's any of my original code left. What I'm best known for is PHP Excel and PHP Spreadsheet. They're actually just part of a whole suite of programs, but PHP Excel and PHP Spreadsheet between them, I've been maintaining them for 16 years, and PHP Excel over that time had 48 million plus downloads. PHP Spreadsheet is running at 89 million, and those are just packages statistics. There's always people that download manually, download from GitHub, or PHP Excel itself was originally on SourceForge. And a lot of people here, I'm sure, have used them, have cursed at them, but are at least familiar with them. Well, I'm the person to blame for them. But I said it's a suite of programs. You also have Word as a document reader, PHP presentation. Believe it or not, this presentation was written using PHP presentation, and tools for working with Visio files and project files as well. Not as popular. PHP spreadsheet, PHP Excel is what I'm best known for. But I contribute a few specific libraries that have proved popular over the years. I have libraries for complex numbers and matrix arithmetic. Quadtrees is surprisingly a geodetic library for converting geodetic datums so that you can convert from WGS84 used by Google Maps to OSGB36 and to other datums used by different mapping agencies around the world. Not all of my libraries are quite as popular, although Enum Helper, specifically written last Christmas for providing some additional tools for working with PHP 8.1 enums, and SpyMaster for looking at the internal state of classes under test. 9 downloads, but I don't even know if that's still being used. Those figures don't clock up very often, but the others do. Libraries that aren't my own, that I've contributed to, you might recognize. Guzzle, PHP-CS, you might use in your CI pipeline. And I'm pretty sure 1 or 2 of you have used Composer in your projects or with your projects before. I've contributed to all of those and a lot more. So I have done a lot of work with code over the years that I've been working with PHP. And I'm also known for inventing elephants, that one in particular, Enfys, who was created to raise money to pay for scholarships and funding for people from minority groups to help them attend conferences. And I'm proud to say that over the Enfys life, Enfys has funded 40 scholarship places at technical conferences for people from minority groups, and ran a workshop in Istanbul to help young women learn web development so that they could have independent careers. That's my background, and I hope that I've established my credentials as an old software developer to impart some of the lessons that I'm going to impart in this second part of the talk. First lesson is one that I'm sure a lot of you have heard before. Never stop learning. If you stop learning, it's not because you know everything, because you don't, it's because you've given up. So I keep myself occupied learning. I do little puzzles like this particular one, wherein for each loop we're assigning both the key and the value to the same variable. What do you actually get? Do you get the key overriding the value, or does the value override the key? Well, perhaps I'll tell you the answer to that one at the end. I read extensively, books on design patterns, books on technologies, blog posts, whatever I can get my hands on still to learn more about computer development generally. And every so often, I will also pick up a new language to look at, probably not in a lot of depth, but in such a way that I can look at, well, interesting how they do this. I wonder how you do the same kind of thing in PHP. But it's not all about learning for work. Yes, you need to keep learning for work, but it's more about having an active mind. And that's particularly important as you get older. Keep your mind active. And I have a variety of ways that I do that, totally separate to any computing related learning that I do. Yes, I do jigsaws. Jigsaw's still a good way to keep your mind active, and it's a great winter pastime. When it's too cold to go outside, sitting around a table doing a jigsaw. Read a lot, fiction in particular. And yes, I have read every single book in that book list, although it's a stock photograph. And of course, there's the daily Wordle that I do as part of my morning rituals every day when I wake up. Helps show how active my mind is getting after I've been asleep, is how efficiently and how quickly I can do the Wordle. One very important lesson that I have failed to learn myself over 60 odd years is to maintain a work-life balance. At the moment, I am trying very actively again to maintain that balance. It's not always easy to do, even when you know it should be something that you're doing, but it is important. As a simple paraphrase, get out and smell the roses. Life is, well, passing me by, particularly after a health scare with my lungs 6 months ago, when I was thinking it was bucket list time. I am trying to get out much more, to do things much more, because I know that there's things I've missed out on. So coming up in this next month, there's a Gustav Klimt exhibition that I'm going to. I love going out walking in the parks of Amsterdam and further afield, particularly in flower season during the spring. That's a lovely place to be. Going to concerts. That was a concert I attended over the summer, 60s music. Dusty Springfield, Aretha Franklin, by an all-girls band. And yes, I was one of those idiots that got up and danced, and my legs really regretted it the following day. But I thoroughly enjoyed the evening, and I didn't think about computers for 1 minute at the time that I was there. Do manage to get a bit more physical exercise. I love stand-up paddling on the canals and on the river. And as I was saying to Simon before we started talking, I love having a day at the spa. I can't even have my mobile phone with me there. I'm completely shut off from the world, cocooned in a world of my own, and I can really enjoy a full 12 hours plus just separate from the world at a spa, enjoying all the facilities. It's one thing the Dutch do very, very well, and they have enormous complexes with a dozen different saunas, steam rooms, etc. But as midlife has hit me, I've been doing one or two other things this year, things that are a bit different for me. I've had a tattoo done, and not being content with having a midlife crisis, having an enormous tattoo done that took 4 full days, extremely painful on the most painful part of the body, full color detail, etc. Earlier this month, I had another tattoo done as well. So yes, a genuine midlife crisis, but something totally unrelated to work. The Netherlands is a flat country, which means it's very windy. Wind comes in across the North Sea, hits Zandvoort Beach. And when I first, short story, my parents brought me over to the Netherlands when I was about 6 years old for a family holiday. I was very young at the time. I only had one memory of that occasion, and that's flying a kite in a park with the planes flying so low overhead that I was afraid that they were going to snag the kite itself as they came into land. And I know now that that must have been at Amsterdam's boss on the flight path in front to Schiphol Airport. But when I told my father I was moving over here to live and work over here, he gave me a kite as a present. And yes, I have flown it at Amsterdam's boss and here at Sandford Beach. It's a great excuse to get outside and, again, think about nothing technology related for a time. Just focus on keeping that kite aloft, on doing aerobatics with it. Your mileage might vary, but these are things that I enjoy doing as my separation, my smelling the roses. Visiting old ruins, yes, the Netherlands does have a few. Theme parks, the Efteling is a bucket list item for me. One of the very first theme parks in existence, and an inspiration to some guy called Walt Disney for a couple of American theme parks that he invented. Bosch Parade, I missed it this year. I was ill, unfortunately. It's a crazy parade that artwork inspired by Hieronymus Bosch, 14th century Dutch artist. And they create boats inspired by that and sail them down the river. Or going to see a show. Those are all my ways of getting out and smelling the roses. But whatever you do to maintain that separation of life and work, maintain it, because the alternative is severe risk of burnout. And that is something you should never allow to happen to yourself. And has been my problem throughout a lot of my career. And OSS maintenance is a large part of that, because it's not just a work-life balance then, it's a work-life open source balance. Work isn't going to suffer, life is going to suffer. So learn to recognize the signs of burnout if you can. Not always easy. I actually have one physical sign. Skin on my forehead, just above my eye, dries up. So I can actually see how dry it is, or feel how dry it is, and know how close to a tipping point I am. But learn to recognize the signs of burnout and stave it off. If you feel you're getting close, do something about it, even if that's talking to someone about it. One thing I've learned in the last year, don't be afraid of therapy. Therapists can be helpful. Part of that cause of burnout is trying to do everything on my own as well, particularly open source related or teamwork related, where I'm leading teams, particularly with more junior developers. It's very easy to try and take on everything yourself. Don't do that. Delegate, because that's how other people learn, and it's how you don't flood yourself with too much to do. So for PHP spreadsheet, you can actually see 2017, where I did have a major burnout that lasted about 18 months. And I was very lucky that I had other minor contributors that were able to step in and keep the project going while I got myself back together again, even though it took me so long to get myself back together again. And now I have a group of developers that help out, and we do share the work between us. So don't try and do everything on your own, whether it's open source or whether it's working as part of a team. Share what you can and help each other. Look out for the other members of your team. Watch out if you identify the signs of burnout in them. try and help them through, or at least alert them to the problems. Trying to do everything on your own is very dangerous, but that's the open source world. In the work world, we can look to user groups, build networks of people. It's just good to have people to talk to about the topics that are affecting us. User groups like, in this case, Amsterdam PHP for me, or PHP Cambridge for you guys, or if you're dialing in from remotely, there's probably user groups where you are as well. Or get in touch with organizations like Open Sourcing Mental Health, because they're very good at talking to people about things like burnout. Other ways of networking with other people with similar levels of problems and to yourself are technical conferences, PHP conferences again. Find yourself a girlfriend or a boyfriend, or even both if you're that way inclined, because life isn't waiting for the storm to pass. There's always going to be storms. Storms come in many different forms. Storm can be your electricity or heating bill this winter. Storm can be a medical situation, such as I had 6 months ago. Storms can be flooding. Not everyone drives as safely as you do. Theft of your laptop, that could be serious if you're a freelancer. There's always storms. So life isn't about waiting for the storm to pass, because there'll be another one along. It's about learning how to dance in the rain. And yes, you can dance on your own. And it can be quite good fun dancing on your own. But it's so much better when you're dancing with someone. Expand your comfort zone. Don't be satisfied with the comfort zone that you've got at the moment. Keep expanding it. Comfort zone, yes, it's nice and safe. You know what you're doing. You've got your rituals, your routines. You're not being stretched. And that's the problem. You're not being stretched in the comfort zone. There are positives to staying in a comfort zone. In particular with work related, you doing what you know how to do. Have your routines, you have your rituals. You are comfortable with them. But there's cons as well, because you're missing out on a lot of opportunities and you're not learning anything new when you're just staying in your comfort zone. But if you leave your comfort zone behind, it can be a very scary thing to do. It can be quite overwhelming. It's exhausting. When I moved here to Amsterdam 4 years ago, I was just taking a leap of faith. I had no idea what was going to happen over here. So it's a risk. It can be a big risk. In coming to Amsterdam, at least it wasn't the biggest risk it could have been. I had safety nets, but there was always the possibility that I might have been disappointed. And it can take a lot of effort. And it's not something that you can just do in a day. Leaving your comfort zone behind and stepping into something new can be a long-term thing. But there are some real benefits to doing it. You're learning about yourself as well, learning new things. It helps you become more confident in yourself and to grow as a person. So expand your comfort zone, because stable life and staying in your comfort zone will destroy you at some point. It stifles development. It drains all colours and dreams. And like water, to stay fresh, we have to keep flowing. Moving into the last parts of the talk now. I'm well known in certain circles, particularly for my conference talks, for my work on PHP spreadsheet. But I'm old. I'm thinking of retiring, or at least cutting back on work. I can't afford to retire. But what legacy do I leave behind? Well, fame isn't a legacy. And legacy code is something you don't want to be remembered for after you've retired from writing. What do people remember you for? They remember how you made them feel. They won't remember the functions that you wrote, the libraries you worked with, but they'll remember how you touched them when you spoke to them. So legacy, if you want to leave a legacy, is living on in the hearts, minds, and ethics of the next generation of developers. So, last lesson for the night, be ethical, says the guy who started his career designing guidance systems or writing guidance systems for torpedoes. Yeah. Don't have to work on software that kills people to be unethical. There's a lot of ways to consider ethics. Whoever wrote the zombie cookie deserves to be on the receiving end of one of my torpedoes. That is a highly unethical creation. But something as simple as gatekeeping. No, you must have a computer science degree to work here. That's gatekeeping. It's controlling who can and can't work in your company. Well, you can do that to some extent, but you're missing out if you do that. You're missing out on all the brilliant developers that don't have computer science degrees. No, you can only be a real coder if you write code for a compile language. PHP developers aren't real coders. HTML developers aren't. That's gatekeeping. They're real coders as much as anybody else that works in the software development industry as a software writer. When it comes to GDPR compliance, how many companies maintain data on their customers much more than they actually need? Be ethical. Maintain only what you need. Do you need to know that someone is more than 18 years old? Or do you actually need to know their date of birth? Do you have to keep the actual date? No, you don't in most cases, just the fact that they are over 18. Tracking software for mobile phones is damn useful. When you're out jogging, it can keep control, keep track of where you are, even give you a sort of day-by-day timeline on Google Maps if you really want to. But for every piece of tracking software, there's something that allows other people to do the tracking. So for someone like joggers, you see someone else jogging nearby. Are they running the same software on Fitbit or whatever they're using? And does it allow you to see where their running routes are? Unthought out secondary consequences of the software you write. But be ethical, stand up for what's right when it comes to that. No, you shouldn't be able to track someone else's movements. Watching the world burn, Bitcoin mining, and other similar pastimes. There's plenty of unethical practices here. Writing software that leads to addiction. Or, current popular favorite of the media, AI software, but trained with all the wrong prejudices. There's so many things that you have to take care of, but stand up for what you believe in. Don't work for companies that indulge in practices like that if you have any alternative. Yes, I started writing software that would kill people, may have killed people for all I know. I got out of that industry as soon as I could. And to be honest, nowadays, I hardly like saying I had a wife and daughter to support. It's not an excuse. The other side of being ethical, be proactive. Actively support the things you believe in. If you believe in diversity and inclusivity, actively support that. If you believe in planting trees, don't just hand over a few quid to Phil Sturgeon to go and plant trees himself. Go out and plant them with him. Get dirty, digging holes, sticking trees in them. Get splinters from stakes, because then you're involved, then you are showing passion. Open sourcing mental health. If you want to support the Ukraine, you don't necessarily have to go out to the Ukraine to fight for them, but you can help Ukrainian refugees arriving in the country, providing essentials for them, but not doing it remotely. Go out and do it. Go out and buy products yourself. Take them to people that have just moved in as refugees. Support green issues. It doesn't matter what you believe in here. It's something as historic as saving the whales. But go out and do it actively. I recently went out fishing plastics from the canals of Amsterdam. Taking a knee. All causes that are worth supporting. But be passionate about any of that. Because if you're passionate about those, it will carry through into your work as well. So there's benefits in all areas of your life. And that's the last lesson to pass on tonight. So thank you for your attention. And for anyone that was trying to work out whether it was the key or the value that got assigned, did anyone have any guesses to that? I'm not looking at the chat at the moment, but the answer is, it ends up being the key that's in there, not the value. So the value is written to the $key variable first, and then the key is written to the $key variable. So thank you very much for your attention. I hope I've not bored you too much with 40 odd years of software development and some of the lessons learned, but I'll pass you back to Simon now.